Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. So, the first 3 episodes of the Wheel of Time have dropped and I've watched them all, as I'm sure all of you have. So this video I'm going to be going over everything that I loved in the first episode of the Wheel of Time on Prime. But before, of course, this video is going to be filled with loads of spoilers for the first episode and most likely parts of the following episodes and the book series as a whole. Right, let's go on. So the first thing I absolutely loved was the introduction of the Taint on the male half of the One Power, and of course the introduction alongside that of the Red Ajah and just the Ajahs in general. I think the way this was, structured, how it was kind of complementing off of each other, I thought was a genius move for whoever, came up with this idea in the writer's room, because they introduce a few key themes and parts of the show and the book series right off the bat to new viewers who don't potentially know or understand anything about the world that they're now going to be watching. Straight away we get an introduction to the Taint on the male half of the One Power, Saladin, and not only that, we see the beginnings or the start of the madness that the male channelers get when they start to channel the One Power. Now, of course, as we all know, this can happen very gradually. It can happen in an instant, and it all depends on the user of the One Power. And this guy obviously is not necessarily named. Even in the X-ray portion of the Amazon Prime app, he is a unnamed character. It says young man, and then the manifestation of his craziness with the old man that he was running away from Leandrin and the fellow Red Sisters was that of his imagination and his craziness at the expense of having used the One Power and the taint that comes along with it. And I thought that was really cool to do from the get-go. So it introduces the fact that if you're a male and you become able to channel the One Power, that is going to be something that happens to literally every single one of them. And not only that, we then get straight away into the differences between the Ajahs, although it's not necessarily something that is understandable for new viewers at that point in time. We're given our first perspective of an Aes Sedai, and from a very, how should I say this, extreme viewpoint on the whole subject when it comes to male channelers and what should be done with them. So yeah, it was really good to see that. I just think straight away getting an introduction to some of the key players. We saw Leandrin, who's going to be someone we know is a Black Ajah member who's going to be betraying the tower and taking most likely a green at some point in time, either in the second season, or maybe towards the end of the first. We don't really know yet because we haven't seen how the show is going to pan out. But I really thought it was great to see the extremeness when it comes to the Red Ajah, and then when we get introduced to other Ajahs from the White Tower, we're going to see a huge contrast between the different Ajahs and their perspectives on the male channelers and just what they're interested in when they're studying in the White Tower and what they go about in. As we all know, each Ajah has a kind of primary goal or objective or interest, so to say. And I think it was really cool to go with the most extreme version straight away, and then we can gradually introduce us to the more lightened or light versions of all the other Ajahs, because they all have their own different primary interests. So that was really cool, and just the way everything played out, to see Leandrin talking to this male channeler and seeing this male channeler talk to this manifestation of the taint on the One Power through maybe a older version of himself or just an older male that could channel as well. I thought that was really good to see, and it was a fantastic dialogue between everyone here. He was talking to this imaginary guy because of the craziness. Leandrin finally uses the power and blocks his path off, and he falls to the ground. And then he goes, "Please, it's not his fault." And Leandrin's like, "Who are you talking to?" no one is there. And I thought that was really good. And just, what's her name? Katie Fleetwood? Is it Katie Fleetwood? Katie Fleetwood, just her acting in this scene was absolutely fantastic. I think it really epitomized how the Red Ajahs view males in this world. There's a huge amount of contempt and disgust towards this man, and just the way she was saying, men should never touch the power. You make it filthy. Everything, the dialogue, everything was perfect. So yeah, let's move on. The next thing I really loved was kind of the women's circle initiation ceremony, and just a general, deeper look at how life is in the Two Rivers, and just how the townsfolk live their lives on a day-to-day basis. It's not a great thing that's touched upon in the books, as we don't spend a huge amount of time there throughout the entirety of the book series. And so to see something new where the team could come up with new ideas and introduce it for the show, I thought was a really great move on their behalf. The women's circle initiation was really good. It's exactly as I saw it a couple of weeks back as well. But interestingly enough, we'd not seen yet the final moments of her initiation, or what we believe to be her final moments of the initiation into the women's circle. Maybe that was just something they filmed and they only used it in the trailer, and we're not going to see that in any episodes. I'm leaning towards the fact we most likely will, but it'll be interesting to see when they insert that into the next episodes that we have yet to watch. And just seeing the general townsfolk of the Two Rivers, as we are now calling it with this show instead of Emond's Field, was really nice. I know a lot of the time when new readers come into the series and they read the book for the first time, there is a huge amount of discussion where they are talking about how it's very similar to the Lord of the Rings and Hobbiton and the Hobbits and the Shire. And that was something I thought they paid real great attention to not have any similarities in the show with, because yes, we do know Robert Jordan leaned heavily on Tolkien's work, especially in the first book. He was a huge fan of his work, and you could see that in the way the Two Rivers were set up when it comes to the contrast between when they left the Two Rivers and Emond's Field and go out into the wider world. And we're no doubt going to see that play out on the show as well. But there was no feel of anything Lord of the Rings-esque or Game of Thrones or any of the other fantasy shows that have come before this one. I felt it was its own self. I felt it stood out. There was nothing similar about any of the Lord of the Rings or, as I said, Game of Thrones. It was one of its own. And the way they went about it, it was, it's a quicker pace, if we're being totally honest, the life there in the Two Rivers than, say, the Shire. And just the way they speak with one another, which I'm sure is a prickly point for a lot of fans, because there's kind of a modernizing language that's been going on for the show to bring it up to date, because we have words that were never used in the books, such as prick and you're an arse, and just the sort of language that was used throughout the first 3 episodes, which was really intriguing and is something I will be covering on another video at another date. Up next, we cannot not talk about the chemistry between Lan and Moiraine, and of course that stems from the natural chemistry between Rosamund Pike and Daniel Henney. I thought the pair of them, separately and together, were absolutely fantastic in their roles. I think their casting choices for these two people was absolutely spot on. They're acting alone, they're acting together, because of course they spend literally the entirety of their time together, was beautiful. I think there's a huge amount of chemistry between the actors, and then that of course goes out and over into the show with the two characters that they're playing. Rosamund Pike is the embodiment of Moiraine. There's not a single moment where I do not believe I'm listening to Moiraine. I instantaneously forgot it was Rosamund Pike. And to be fair, I felt that across the board with all the actors. I didn't think, oh, there's Marcus Rutherford, oh, there's Madeline. Or there's Zoe Robbins, and all of them fantastic casting choices, and they all did their roles with all their characters to perfection to me personally. And that was what I was really loving about the whole show when it comes to the actors and the characters and the world in general. I felt completely immersed in the world. But yeah, I kind of digressed off of the track. So let's get back onto it. So I was talking about Moiraine and Lan. And just you can see the chemistry between one another from having a huge amount of time spent with one another over the years. Since obviously New Spring was when we first were introduced to them both. After, of course, the series had begun and they went back so we could see the beginnings of where their quest and journey and mission came from. Now their kind of relationship transcends just kind of this friends and companionship that we have at this point. I feel this goes into kind of the way they fight the Shadowspawn that turn up. I think there's that natural understanding of one another. Now, I think this obviously comes naturally with the bond that they have, as Lan is Moiraine's warder. But I feel they've spent such a huge amount of time with one another. If that bond was to be taken away, it would still be intact, their chemistry and their understanding of one another and how they operate in the field. And of course, when they're not fighting the Shadowspawn as well. And as a testament, and not only that, the way they were so comfortable in one another's company, and to the point of them being, completely naked in front of one another, and there's not a bit of sexual chemistry there. It's very much a platonic relationship, as Daniel Henney and Rosamund Pike have said on many occasions, and as we know, of course, through reading the books. And I felt that was one of the more intimate scenes, not because they were naked. That was almost the secondary part of that particular scene. It was the fact how they both could let their guard down because they were in private with one another. I always feel, and this is very true of all the Aes Sedai, they have this sort of mask that they have on themselves when they're out in the world, conducting whatever they are doing and going about their business as Aes Sedai, to kind of show this, moment or the continuation of their superiority over the rest of the world. But in this moment, you can see Moiraine for what she is in that very moment. She's completely let her guard down. That mask is gone. And they're just basically two friends in the bathtub, naked, just having a talk about what's been going on in the day and just that generalization. And I thought that moment was beautifully written, beautifully acted. And I think it really showed the strength of their bond and their relationship with one another. Right, up next we have Padan Fain. Now this was fantastic to see. Johan Myers did a fantastic job as Padan Fain, because straight away when Padan Fain turns up into the village, there's this false sense of bravado that he's putting on for the people, and because they're so naive and haven't seen much of the world, they can't see through that. But of course, people like us, not just because we've we've read the books and we know his character and his arc, but you can just tell how fake everything is with him. It's all a show, it's all an act, as we know. And you can just see it with his smiles, with his mannerism. And then of course, when Mat starts to interact with Padan Fain, we see a bit more of a real Padan Fain within those moments. But of course, he still has that level of a mask, even still in that moment on, because as we all know, he's a dark friend, and dark friends don't necessarily show their true colours in the day of light, now do they? So that was really interesting to see. And of course, I think there's so much more to come from the character. I think he's going to be one of those characters that pops up at pivotal moments in the season, where he'll have a much bigger impact, as we all know, especially in Faldara when we get to that scene. So I'm sure Padan Fain is still going to be there, and we're going to get that whole portion of the plot play out. And so yeah, that was fantastic to see. I absolutely loved the portrayal of Padan Fain in the show, and I really can't wait to continue seeing how Johan Myers goes about with this character and see the depths of despair and craziness Padan Fain will now get to in this season and subsequent ones. Right, up next we have to talk about like the fight scenes and just the amount of, blood and gore and all of that sort of thing. I think the show did a fantastic job with it. It was really well thought out. There's a sense of realism with all of the scenes, with the amount of blood, with the level of carnage that goes on. It wasn't too theatrical, it wasn't over the top, and they haven't toned it down. I felt they put it at a level where they were very much portraying those sorts of things as realistically as they could. And I think it really showed. All the scenes where there were certain wounds that will happen, say for example, time with the Trolloc, there were just slight gashes, blood didn't pour out of it in an exaggeration. The scene where Perrin unfortunately killed his wife, that was really well done. Now that, of course, was a huge amount of blood, copious amounts. And of course that's to be expected in the case because that was a lot worse of a wound. And so just the kind of leveling that they went with the types of wounds and just the kind of injuries that you saw across the board during the winter night attack on the two rivers, or as we know, Emma's Field, and of course at the Alford farmhouse, was really well done. And I think it was just that huge sense of realism throughout all these sorts of moments. And of course, finally, I would love to mention the fact of the women's circle killing one of the Trollocs. I thought that whole scene was really cool, and I think it helped to set up something that happened, I believe it was in episode 2, definitely it was, where there's a bit of a quiet moment with the group as they're on the road, and they start to sing, I believe, partially in the old tongue about Menephrin, and then partially in, of course, today's dialogue. And it was really good to see these women from the bloodline of the Menephrin showcasing they still have that, fighting spirit, that spring in their step, that they're not going to not, come into action if something like that is going to be happening on their doorstep, attacking their people. They're going to be right there with the men. They're going to be attacking the Trollocs, and that was clearly evident in the scene. And I just loved the way it was set up. I loved Daisy Conga, I forget what her name is, the way she spoke about what was going to happen with the Trolloc, and then just the attack all the women from the women's circle conducted on that Trolloc was awesome to see. And I thought, yeah, that was really cool. And then there was a playoff from that, as I've just mentioned, in that second episode with the song, and then of course the subsequent history lesson from Moiraine on the land that they're from and what it was prior to it being the two rivers. And I thought that was really cool. And there's themes of that throughout the first episode that have playoffs in the subsequent episodes after that. For example, Matt, there was that as well. But that's for a separate video I'm going to just do completely on Matt, because I want to have a complete video just on Matt and the changes with his, character and his backstory and his family in general, because that's a big talking point among the fandom, as I'm sure. But I really did like what they did with it, really, in the end, especially when we got the playoff in that third episode. But yeah, I'll get into that at that point in time. But yeah, those are the things that I absolutely loved in the first episode. I loved it as a whole, as I did all three to this point. Every character, every actor portraying characters was on point. Nothing felt odd, nothing felt out of place. And it was just a really solid beginning to me personally. Yes, there was a few issues. It was a bit rushed here and there, but I'll most likely touch upon that on stuff I didn't like in this first episode. So look out for that at a later date in another video. So guys, you made it to the end of this video. I hope you've all enjoyed it. If you have, please leave a thumbs up on the video. And if you have any comments on anything that I have discussed, of course, please do leave them and I'll try and respond to you all in due course. Right guys, thank you for watching. I'll catch you all later in another video.